There are preservation methods that kept food safe for years without refrigeration. Techniques so effective that medieval households never lost food to spoilage, never depended on electricity, and stored enough to survive winters and famines. For over 1,000 years, every family knew how to preserve meat, vegetables, and dairy using nothing but salt, smoke, fat, and time. They didn't need freezers. They didn't need canning equipment. They didn't need any technology that could break or fail, just knowledge that passed from parent to child for generations. Then in the early 1900s, food safety regulations changed everything. Health departments declared traditional preservation methods unsafe. They claimed bacteria would kill you, that only modern refrigeration and canning were safe. Traditional techniques were banned, restricted, or regulated until they became impractical. Within decades, knowledge that had kept humanity fed for millennia was dismissed as primitive and dangerous. But here's what they didn't tell you. Modern scientists studying these banned methods are discovering they were genius, that medieval preservation created environments hostile to pathogens, that the food was often safer and more nutritious than what comes from your refrigerator, and that every method they banned worked because of chemistry and microbiology that medieval people understood intuitively. This is why food regulators banned techniques that scientists now admit were brilliant. Welcome to Olden Path. If you're tired of losing food every time the power fails, hit subscribe and the bell. These methods could save you when refrigeration doesn't. Method 1. Ash curing. The alkaline preservation they called primitive until chemistry proved it worked. Medieval households saved wood ash from cooking fires and used it to preserve eggs and meat. For eggs, you mixed ash with salt and buried fresh eggs in the mixture. The ash created an alkaline environment with a pH high enough to prevent bacterial growth. The salt drew out moisture. Eggs preserved this way lasted 6 to 8 months without refrigeration. When you needed eggs, you pulled them from the ash, rinsed them, and used them normally. Health departments in the 1950s began discouraging ash preservation, claiming it was unsanitary. But modern microbiological testing proves otherwise. The high pH of wood ash, typically between 9 and 11, creates conditions where salmonella and other pathogens can't survive. The method worked perfectly. It was banned not because it was dangerous, but because it made people independent of refrigeration. The chemistry is elegant. Wood ash contains potassium carbonate and calcium carbonate, both alkaline compounds. When mixed with moisture, these create a caustic environment. Bacteria require near-neutral pH to survive. At pH levels above 9, their cell membranes break down. Medieval people didn't know the chemistry. They knew eggs buried in ash stayed good through winter, while eggs left out spoiled in days. Modern testing confirms their observations were accurate. Ash curing also worked for meat. Pack meat in a mixture of ash, salt, and sometimes saltpeter, and the alkaline environment combined with dehydration preserves it for months. Traditional Italian and Spanish cured meats used ash as part of the curing process. The ash on certain salamis isn't decorative, it's functional preservation. Modern food safety laws restrict this in commercial production, requiring temperature-controlled curing chambers instead. The old method gets dismissed as inconsistent and risky, but families that still use it report zero food safety issues across generations. The chemistry works. Alkalinity plus salt plus time equals preservation. One reason regulators targeted ash curing was standardization. Industrial food production requires consistent, measurable processes. Temperature-controlled chambers can be monitored and inspected. Ash curing depends on variables like wood type and ambient humidity. It's harder to regulate. You can't inspect it. You can't control who does it. That lack of control is unacceptable to bureaucracies built around oversight. So the method gets discouraged, restricted, or outright banned in commercial settings. Method 2. Lacto-fermentation in brine, strong enough to kill you. Medieval fermentation used salt concentrations that modern recipes consider extreme, 10 to 15% salt by weight. At that concentration, the brine is hostile to nearly everything except specific lactobacillus bacteria that thrive in high salt. Those bacteria outcompete all pathogens. They produce lactic acid that drops the pH even further. Sauerkraut made with this method lasts years in cool storage, not months, years. The high salt prevents mold, prevents soft tissue breakdown, and produces an incredibly stable product. Modern fermentation recipes use 2 to 3% salt, claiming that lower salt is healthier and tastes better, but lower salt means higher spoilage risk. The fermentation is less stable, mold can develop, and the product needs refrigeration to stay safe. The microbiology is straightforward. Lactobacillus bacteria are salt tolerant. Most pathogenic bacteria are not. When you create a 10% salt brine and submerge vegetables, you've created a selective environment. Only organisms that can handle high salt will survive. Lactobacillus thrives, consuming sugars and producing lactic acid. Within days, the pH drops below 4.5. At that acidity level, even salt-sensitive pathogens can't survive. You've created a double barrier, high salt plus low pH. Nothing harmful can establish. Food regulators discourage high salt fermentation by claiming it's too salty to eat, but you rinse fermented vegetables before eating. The salt mostly stays in the brine, and medieval people eating high salt fermented vegetables didn't have the hypertension epidemic modern populations do. The problem isn't salt in whole foods, it's salt in processed foods combined with lack of potassium. Fermented vegetables provide both in balanced ratios. Recent research shows traditional high salt fermentation produces compounds that lower blood pressure and improve cardiovascular health. The method isn't dangerous, it's protective, but admitting that would undermine decades of low-salt dietary advice. The real issue is that high-salt fermentation creates shelf-stable products that don't need cold chain infrastructure. A barrel of traditionally fermented sauerkraut sits in a cellar for 2 years without refrigeration. That stability eliminates the need for industrial refrigeration, equipment manufacturers, and cold storage facilities. 1 barrel of sauerkraut, one-time salt purchase, 2 years of food, no recurring costs, no dependence. That's unacceptable to industries built on recurring revenue. Method 3. Confit preservation in pure fat with 0 water content. Take meat, salt it heavily for 24 hours, rinse it, then cook it completely submerged in fat at low temperature for hours. Once cooked, pack the meat into containers and pour fat over the top until it's sealed under at least 1 inch of solid fat. No air reaches the meat, no moisture exists in the fat, no bacteria can survive. The meat stays preserved for 6 months or longer in a cool cellar. Medieval French households used this method for duck, goose, and pork. After slaughter, they rendered all the fat and used it to preserve the meat. A single goose provided enough fat to preserve itself. Modern food safety regulations restrict confit preservation by requiring refrigeration of all cooked meat products. The claim is that botulism could develop in the anaerobic environment under the fat seal, but botulism requires specific conditions. Anaerobic environment, yes, but also moisture, low acid pH, and specific temperatures. Confit has no moisture. Fat is hydrophobic. Water can't exist in pure rendered fat. Botulism, spores can't germinate without moisture. Scientists studying traditional confit have found 0 evidence of botulism risk when done correctly. The fat seal is impermeable to air and moisture. The cooking process kills vegetative bacteria. The preservation is perfect from a microbiological standpoint. But acknowledging that would undermine the regulatory framework that requires refrigeration for all cooked meat. Admitting that fat-sealed confit is safe at room temperature would open questions about other preserved meats. The answer is control. Refrigeration creates dependence on infrastructure. Confit creates independence. A household that can preserve its own meat in rendered fat doesn't need to buy commercially preserved meat, doesn't need a freezer. That independence threatens multiple industries simultaneously. Method 4. Honey preservation that kills bacteria through osmotic pressure. Honey has been found in Egyptian tombs 3,000 years old, still edible. Honey never spoils because bacteria can't survive in it. The sugar concentration is so high that it draws water out of bacterial cells through osmosis, killing them through dehydration. Additionally, honey is acidic, with a pH between 3.2 and 4.5. The combination of osmotic pressure and acidity makes honey one of the most effective natural antimicrobial substances that exists. Medieval households used honey to preserve fruits, nuts, herbs, and even meat. Pack fruit into jars and cover completely with honey. The fruit stays preserved indefinitely. The honey absorbs fruit flavors and becomes fruit-infused honey. Both products are usable. For meat, honey preservation was used for small amounts of high-value cuts. The meat was cooked first, then sealed in honey while still hot. The meat would keep for months. Crusaders carried honey-preserved meat on campaigns. The method worked in any climate without refrigeration. Modern food safety guidance discourages honey preservation, particularly for infants, claiming botulism risk. And for children under 1 year, that's legitimate. But for adults and children over 1 year, honey-preserved foods are completely safe. Adult stomach acid kills botulism spores before they can germinate. The spores can't survive in honey's acidic, high-sugar environment. Yet the warning gets extended to discourage all honey preservation. But science proves honey is one of the most effective natural preservatives that exists. Medieval people used it because it worked. Modern restrictions exist because honey preservation makes people too independent. Think about what honey preservation means for food security. A household with beehives has unlimited preservation capacity. Any fruit harvest can be preserved in honey. Any herb can be stored for medicinal use, and honey itself never spoils. That's complete food security without dependence on any outside system. No electricity, no equipment, no supply chain. That level of independence is exactly what industrial food systems needed to eliminate. Method 5. Live fermentation with surface mold that protects instead of spoils. Certain traditional fermentations develop a surface layer of white mold or yeast that medieval people understood was protective. Sauerkraut and kimchi develop kaham yeast, a harmless surface organism that forms a film over the brine. That film prevents oxygen from reaching the vegetables below. It protects against harmful molds and bacteria that require oxygen. Medieval fermenters left the calm yeast in place until they needed to access the vegetables. Modern fermentation guides tell you to remove calm yeast immediately. They claim it's contamination, but traditional fermenters knew better. The calm yeast is protective, not harmful. Studies of traditional fermentations with calm yeast show they're microbiologically safe. The yeast doesn't produce toxins. It simply creates a film that seals the fermentation from air. Removing it exposes the vegetables to oxygen, which can allow mold to develop. The instruction to remove calm yeast comes from modern aesthetic standards, not safety. Similarly, traditional aged cheeses and cured meats develop beneficial surface molds. The white bloom on aged salami is penicillium, the same genus as the mold that produces penicillin. It's protective. It prevents harmful bacteria from colonizing the meat. Traditional European meat curers encouraged this mold growth. They understood that the right mold protected the meat. Modern food safety regulations require controlled mold strains in commercial production. The claim is that you can't know if wild molds are safe, but generations of safe use prove otherwise. The beneficial molds establish first because they're adapted to the curing environment. They outcompete harmful molds. But regulatory frameworks don't accept traditional knowledge. They require laboratory testing and approved cultures. Small-scale traditional curers can't afford that. So the methods get abandoned. Method 6. Burial preservation using Earth's natural cooling and antimicrobial properties. Medieval households buried certain foods directly in the ground for long-term storage. Root vegetables like carrots, beets, and turnips were left in the ground through winter, mulched heavily with straw to prevent the soil from freezing solid. You dug them up as needed. The cool, stable temperature of the soil, typically between 35 and 45 degrees below the frost line, kept the vegetables in dormancy. They stayed alive but didn't rot because the temperature was too cold for decomposition bacteria. The nutritional advantage of leaving vegetables in the ground is significant. The vegetables remain alive. They continue slow metabolic processes. This is why carrots dug from frozen ground in February are often sweeter than October carrots. The cold triggers sugar production. When you eat them, you're eating living food with active enzymes and full nutrient content. Compare that to refrigerated vegetables, which are dying slowly, or frozen vegetables, which are dead. Modern food safety regulations make burial preservation nearly impossible. Health codes prohibit storing food in contact with soil. The claim is contamination risk from soil, bacteria, but soil contains more beneficial organisms than harmful ones. Healthy soil is teeming with bacteria and fungi that outcompete pathogens. The real issue is that burial preservation is uncontrollable. You can't regulate it, inspect it, or tax it. People just dig holes and store food. That lack of oversight is unacceptable to regulatory agencies, so burial methods get banned under sanitation rules. Meanwhile, rural communities worldwide still use earth storage for root vegetables because it works better than refrigeration. Method 7. Fat cap preservation, where lard seals out oxygen and bacteria. After rendering pork fat into lard, medieval households poured a layer of hot liquid lard over cooked or preserved foods in crocks. As the lard cooled and solidified, it formed an airtight seal. No oxygen could reach the food below. Cooked sausages, pâtés, and terrines were preserved this way. The fat cap lasted months in cool storage. When you wanted to access the food, you broke the seal, scooped out what you needed, then resealed with fresh melted lard. The physics is simple. Oxygen doesn't dissolve in fat. Bacteria need oxygen to survive. If you eliminate oxygen contact, you eliminate most bacterial growth. Fat creates that barrier. It's also impermeable to moisture. Bacteria can't migrate through fat to reach the food below. Medieval people didn't understand oxidation or bacterial metabolism. They knew that food sealed under lard stayed good, while food left exposed spoiled. Modern food safety guidance discourages fat cap preservation, claiming anaerobic conditions could allow botulism. But this ignores several factors. Most foods preserved under fat caps were cooked before sealing. Cooking kills botulism spores. Many preserved foods were acidic. Botulism can't grow at pH below 4.6. Traditional storage was done in cool cellars. The combination made botulism growth extremely unlikely. What regulators won't acknowledge is that fat cap preservation directly competes with industrial canning, vacuum sealing, and refrigeration. All of those require purchased equipment. Fat cap preservation needs rendered fat and a crock. You render fat from animals you're already processing. The only ongoing input is the fat itself, a byproduct of cooking meat. There's no recurring purchase. That independence is unacceptable to industries built on selling preservation equipment. Here's what connects all 7 methods. They worked because of chemistry and microbiology that medieval people understood through observation. High pH prevents bacteria. High salt selects beneficial organisms. Fat seals out oxygen. Honey dehydrates cells. Protective molds outcompete pathogens. Cool earth prevents decomposition. Every method had sound scientific basis, even though the people using them didn't know the scientific terms. They knew it worked. They knew food stayed safe. That empirical knowledge was sufficient. Modern food safety regulations dismissed all of it as primitive and dangerous. They required refrigeration, canning, or commercial processing for everything. The result was making people dependent on industrial food systems. You can't preserve your own food safely, so you must buy preserved food from corporations. That dependency wasn't an accident. It was the goal. Food corporations and appliance manufacturers both benefited from convincing people that home preservation was risky. But scientists studying traditional preservation are now admitting what regulators won't. These methods worked. They were safe when done correctly, and in many cases they produced food that was more nutritious and stable than modern alternatives. Fermented foods have probiotics. Ash-cured eggs retain nutrients better. Confit preserves texture and flavor. Fat-sealed terrines develop complex flavors. Honey-preserved fruits retain vitamins. Every method had advantages modern preservation lacks. The restrictions weren't about safety. They were about control, creating regulatory frameworks that only industrial operations could comply with, making home preservation impractical, and culturally messaging that traditional methods were dangerous until people stopped trying them. That psychological barrier is more effective than any law. People regulate themselves out of independence without realizing what they have lost. If this opened your eyes to preservation methods that actually work, subscribe to Olden Path and hit the bell. Share this with people who want food security that doesn't depend on electricity. Comment and tell me which banned method you're going to try first. This isn't just about food preservation. It's about reclaiming the knowledge that made people self-sufficient. The techniques that regulators banned, not because they were dangerous, but because they worked too well. Medieval households knew something modern food safety won't admit. Real preservation doesn't need refrigeration, doesn't need canning, equipment, and doesn't need corporate permission. It just needs knowledge they spent a century trying to erase.